because you've been to another country. So you're kind of mixed up. So I was born in Kenya, in Africa, where my father was also born. And my story, I'll tell you a little bit about my father. My grandfather lived in Liverpool, and he got on very badly with his father, so he ran away from home, jumped on a ship, and ended up in Mombasa in Kenya. And he was a farmer there for many years. And I don't know if you know the story of the British in East Africa, but many of them were very racist. So they kind of ruled the country as colonies. So my father grew up in a home where there were many Africans around, but it was a bit of a difficult relationship. They wouldn't have, the white people wouldn't allow the Africans to stay in their home, and they wouldn't stay in the Africans' homes. So they kind of kept it apart. It's a little bit like South Africa in the bad days. So my father then he was one of 10 children, and he was sent to this country to go to university and to study printing. And he came to this country, and he was invited to go to hear a man called Billy Graham, who was an evangelist. So he was coming and telling people about Jesus. So my father went along to make fun of it, because he thought these stupid people, so he went, and it was in a big football field like this. And after a while he thought, I don't need this. So he left the stadium, and as he walked through the door, a man said to him, why are you leaving? He said, I don't need this stuff, this Christianity stuff. And the man said to him, are you a Christian? And he said, I'm trying to be a Christian. So the man said to him, have you ever tried to be an elephant? So my father just walked off. He thought, that's crazy. But because he's from Africa, that question stayed in his mind, and he thought, how can you try to be an elephant? You have to be born an elephant. And actually that's what this man was saying to him. Being a Christian is not about who your father is or your mother or whatever. It's about something that must happen to you. And when he then went back to Africa, it was in the middle of something called the Mau Mau uprising, which was really the Kenyans fighting against the British to get independence for their country. And my father was in the army, he was in the intelligence. And he was so impressed with the courage of the African Christians who he met that he decided, actually, this is what I want for myself. So I tell that story because I then grew up in that family. Actually, I owe my Christianity, my faith really, to these African friends. And then my father came back to Britain, and he worked in a big church in London, and he worked with international students. So all of my childhood, we always had a Korean or a Kenyan or a Nigerian or somebody else staying with us. And I don't know whether you ever had problems with your parents, probably never did, but I was sometimes a bit rebellious, and I didn't get on very well with my parents. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. But these students who lived in our house, I could always talk to them. And I noticed that the Christians around me in London, where I was growing up, they often called themselves Christians, but they didn't really pray much. They never really fasted. Their Christian faith wasn't very deep and strong. Whereas these Africans, these Asians, it was very different. And they were just a bit older than me, and therefore I could really talk to them and say, what's going on here? And in some ways I think I also then got my faith from them. So then at 16 years old, I got a scholarship to go from London and study in America. So I was in America for 7 years at high school, and then again got another scholarship when I was at university. And a couple of years through university, I saw a sign on the wall at the university, and it said, would you like to apply for a travelling fellowship to go to any country you like, and we will give you $2,000. In those days it was a lot of money, probably still is if you compare it to pounds. And then, so I applied for this and got it, and I went to Pakistan to teach English to Afghan refugees. And it was an amazing experience. These big, hairy Mujahideen freedom fighters with their Kalashnikovs. And the Russians were in Afghanistan, and they were fighting them, and they would come to Peshawar, just over the border in Pakistan, to have a break, and then they would go